Hey everyone, welcome to the Guiding You Forward podcast presented by Mountain America Credit Union, where we talk about all things financial related, with the exception of today. We're talking about tiny homes. And thankfully, Brian Hawkins is here. Hi, Brian.
How you doing, Kristalina?
Doing so good. And Brian's going to teach us all we need to know about tiny homes because he's the expert.
Yes, everything you will ever need to know we'll talk about today.
Okay, love it, love it. So let's just get into it right out of the gate. I mean, I think tiny home is pretty self-explanatory, but what really is a tiny home for those of us that know nothing about tiny homes?
It's a good question because it's a very relative term, right? Being tiny, but the typical definition is a home that's 400 square feet or less on wheels.
Okay.
But it can be a shipping container home, it could be a home on wheels, it could be a mother-in-law apartment in the backyard or an accessory dwelling unit. There's a lot of things that fit into that tiny home mold. But the standard definition that most people think of or you see on Instagram is 400 square feet or less on wheels.
Okay. So how many of these tiny homes on wheels for that standard definition are being built? I mean, you build them, right?
Yeah. We do. So for me personally, we do on average anywhere from 20 to 35 on an annual basis, depending on how custom they are. They take a little bit longer.
Sure.
But across the country, it's probably about 1,000 every single year that are being built.
Okay. So pretty low across the country, only 1,000. Or is that high? What are your thoughts?
They're pretty custom homes. So for most tiny house builders, they don't have an enormous shop. They don't have a huge operation. They're pretty mom and pop style setups. And because of the issues that most builders and tiny house owners face across the country, people want to have all those answers in place before you start mass producing tiny homes.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about some of those things you just mentioned.
Yeah.
There's a few issues when it comes to building a tiny home. But even before we get into that, I feel like tiny homes they're popular.
Oh yeah.
I'm hearing about them more and more. I feel like maybe it's obviously we all want to have a low carbon footprint. I feel like minimalism is popular right now.
Oh yeah.
What are your thoughts as to why tiny homes are taking off?
There's a couple of reasons. The two biggest are typically for financial reasons from an affordability standpoint. And the other is, like you mentioned, having a low carbon footprint. So kind of a minimalistic lifestyle.
Okay.
There's a really famous saying in the tiny house community that you need to live simply so others can simply live. So it goes a long way for that people are looking to not only help people around them now, but the next generation and doing what they can to make a difference.
Okay, I love that. That's very, very cool. So going back to some of those issues when it comes to building, getting funding for a tiny home, what are some of those pain points?
The two biggest issues by far are where to live in a tiny home legally, where you can put the home, and then how to get it financed.
Okay.
So when it comes to where you can put your home, it's going to vary greatly depending on where you're located. So city to city, it's not even a state issue or a federal issue. It's literally city by city on a case by case basis.
Okay.
And then even within that city, depending on where you're living and what that exact lot is zoned as, they might allow an accessory dwelling or mother-in-law apartment. They might not allow anything on wheels at all. It might not have any capability of having solar or water tanks. So it's very, very specific based on where you live for the zoning. The financing is a whole nother game of people have no idea what to classify these as, right? So for your standard banking institution, they don't know what it's valued at 5 years from now. They don't know what note they need to issue on that home, especially if it's on wheels. It really just throws a wrench into everything. So it's those two are by far the biggest issues, are where to put them and how to get them financed.
Okay. So is it an RV? Is it a house? Is it?
Depends on who you ask and who's building it.
Fair enough.
So there are two codes that most builders will comply with. One is an RVIA code, the RV standard, and it's permanently built on a trailer or a chassis. So it has a VIN number. Makes a lot of sense for banks to have an RV loan for that.
Yeah.
The other is called an ANSI or ANSI standard, which is more of the IRC, more of a residential building code. And there are a few nuances in there, things like your stairs. When you're in a tiny home, you can't build that to code. You can't have your standard kind of rise and run of each stair meet your typical code for a residential build because you just don't have the space.
Right.
So there's a few little things in there that make it really tricky depending on what you're doing. But it can absolutely be considered an RV depending on where you park it. A lot of people go to RV parks or KOAs.
Okay.
Or it can be a home if you want to put it in someone's backyard and even have it on a foundation. You want to build that to more of a residential code.
Okay, fair enough. So before we get into any more details about tiny homes, who is the best candidate for a tiny home? Is there like a demographic type of person? I mean, obviously, probably depending on your personality too and your lifestyle, right?
Yes, it is not for everyone.
I cannot imagine being stuck in 400 square feet with my husband for the rest of my life, but
yeah,
especially right now during COVID where we're all working remotely,
Yep.
like, that sounds terrifying
Yep,
to me. Yeah, I'm sure there's people that love it.
There's a reason the RV industry is doing so well right now, right? People like to have their space and kind of get out,
Sure.
even with their family. That's the case. I always joke around that because I don't live in a tiny home because I have 4 kids. It just wouldn't make sense for my wife and I and our 4 children to be in 400 square feet or less. I joke around that I would need one for me and my kids and one for my wife. Like there's no way we could all be in that small of a space.
Yeah.
But the average people that are looking for those type of homes are younger couples that are just starting out. So typically 2 people, maybe 1 or 2 pets or 1 child.
Yeah.
And then the other end of the spectrum are the baby boomers that are just retiring, don't want the house, don't want the yard, don't want the maintenance, and want to be able to travel. They kind of want a place to be able to lay their head at night, but they don't want to take care of it 24/7.
Sure.
So most of your typical suburb, families that are in their late 20s to late 40s aren't the average people looking for a tiny home. But there are a lot more people looking to downsize and get into a smaller home, both for economical and then also your environmental reasons as well. But the average are definitely young 20s, and then I would say late 50s, early 60s are who are looking for tiny homes right now.
Very, very cool. Okay, so there is a specific
Absolutely.
audience for
Yep.
these. Okay. Yeah, I won't be moving in one anytime soon with my 3 kids either.
That's okay.
But maybe in the future, right?
Yeah.
Always down the line. So, how on earth did you get started in all of this, Brian? I mean, you don't live in one. You said you're not going to live in one anytime soon. Why on earth are you building tiny homes?
I definitely did not grow up thinking I was going to build tiny homes. I didn't know they existed until about 7 years ago. My brother-in-law was a general contractor, and I was in sales at Vivint. I was selling home security systems, and I had done that for almost a decade. But my brother-in-law is a general contractor, and his friend had asked him to build one for some property he had up in Montana. He had a hunting place that he wanted to go to 2 or 3 times a year, just kind of wanted a place to bug out to and more of a sleeping lodge.
Yeah.
So my brother-in-law was building one, which he had never done before. He had built homes everywhere from every size and spec, but never built one on wheels. And he was building it completely by himself. And he asked me to come down and take a look at it one day just to see what he was doing. So I stopped by. So we got crazy and decided to do our research and found out there's not enough people building tiny homes around the country. There's an enormous demand, which we didn't have any idea how big that market was. We assumed if we could build 4 or 5 a year, we would do just fine. So we scared the heck out of our wives. So he's married to my sister. So my sister and my wife both thought we were insane. Very supportive, but both thought we were absolutely insane to quit what we were doing and start building tiny homes. And we didn't do it half-heartedly. I mean, we literally went all in, started building homes. I did the marketing and sales side and was finding cash buyers all over the country that couldn't find a builder. There were a couple of really small groups online where you can go and kind of ask questions about tiny homes in general. So I started going through all those websites to find people that were looking to have a tiny house built and seeing if there was some way that we could build that for them. And that was how we got the ball rolling with that.
Oh my goodness. That's incredible. I love that
nuts.
story.
It was absolutely nuts, but it worked out.
So how long have you been doing this for now?
6 years. We started building 6 years ago. It was the beginning of 2014. And the Instagram side of it, the marketing side of it, was never the intent. That was an afterthought. That was literally used just as a sales tool. I mean, that was the whole reason that I started that. We needed a way to get the word out, and I didn't have money to go run marketing campaigns everywhere. And social media was a phenomenal tool to get the word out, not just for me, but for tiny homes in general. And it snowballed from wanting to just showcase what we were building to what all these other builders across the country were doing. I mean, they have phenomenal homes. The craftsmanship is awesome. The style looked really good, and they were very, Instagrammable, for lack of a better word. So we all went to the same shows. We all talked to each other. We were all fighting for the same customers. But all of these builders were in the exact same boat we were, that we were cash strapped, time strapped. We didn't have enough time to build as many homes as we wanted, let alone the money to go hire a bunch of people to come in and help us build all the time. So we all got in a room together and we started talking about what we could do to make that happen. And I told them this is what I was doing, and if you want, I'm more than happy to start sharing everybody else's work to help the movement along. And it quickly snowballed out of control from that point.
So that's how Tiny House Movement was born.
Yes.
Very, very cool. So just, for our listeners out there, if you have some extra time, go follow Tiny House Movement on Instagram, and you will reconsider everything in life, because, oh my gosh, it's amazing how efficient these homes are.
They're fantastic. Everything has to be multifunctional. You can't have any wasted space.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really great designs out there. People still come up with new designs that I haven't seen, which is awesome. And it is a worldwide trend. This is not something unique to the United States. People have been living in small homes forever. But there's a lot of places. That Instagram page in particular, less than half of the followers are in the United States. So
Wow.
it's a very worldwide movement of people trying to be minimalistic and also financially conscious of what they're doing.